Michelle and I are then campaigning out in Iowa, and we're going to farms and we're going to counties. And at one point, Michelle turned to me and she said, "You know, if I was living in a farmhouse." Where the sheriff's department is pretty far away. And somebody can just turn off the highway and come up to the farm, I'd want to have a shotgun or a rifle to make. Sure that I was protected and my family was protected. And she was absolutely right. And so part of the reason I think that this ends up being such a difficult issue is because people occupy different realities. There are a whole bunch of law-abiding citizens who have grown up hunting with their dad. Or going to the shooting range, and are responsible gun owners. And then there's the reality that there are neighborhoods around the country where it is easier. For a 12 or 13-year-old to purchase a gun and cheaper than it is for them to get a book. Anderson Cooper. President Obama, well, but that's not exactly accurate. Look, first of all, it's important for everybody to understand what I proposed and what I haven't proposed. What I've said consistently throughout my presidency is I respect the Second Amendment. I respect the right to bear arms, I respect people who want a gun for self-protection, for hunting, for sportsmanship. But all of us can agree that it makes sense to do everything we can to keep guns. Out of the hands of people who would try to do others harm, or to do themselves harm. Because every year we're losing 30,000 people to gun violence. 2/3 of those are actually suicides. Hundreds of kids under the age of 18 are being shot or shooting themselves. Often by accident, many of them under the age of 5. And so if we can combine gun safety with sensible background checks and some other steps, we're not going to eliminate gun violence, but we will lessen it. And if we take that number from 30,000 down to, let's say, 28,000, that's 2. Families who don't have to go through what the families at Newtown or San Bernardino or Charleston went through. And so what we proposed is that if you have a background check system that has a bunch of big loopholes, which is why a lot of criminals and people who shouldn't have guns are able to get guns. Question, but they're not buying them at gun shows. Only 1% of criminals are buying them at gun shows. President Obama, no, but this is what happens. Let's go back to the city of Chicago that has strong gun control laws. And oftentimes the NRA will point to that as an example and say, see, these things don't work. Well, the problem is that about 30–40% of those guns are coming from Indiana. Across the border, where there are much laxer laws. And so folks will go to a gun show and purchase a whole bunch of firearms. Put them in a van, drive up into Mike Fledger's neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Where his parish is, open up the trunk, and those things are for sale. Now, technically, you could say those folks bought them illegally. but it was facilitated by the fact that what used to be a small exception that said collectors and hobbyists don't. Need to go through a background check has become this massive industry where people who are doing business are. In fact, saying that they're not in the business of selling guns, but are. And all we're saying here is that we want to put everybody on notice that the definition of doing business, which means you have to register. And it means you have to run a background check as if you are making a profit and repeatedly selling guns. Then you should have to follow the same rules as every other gun dealer. And what that means. Anderson Cooper. President Obama, look, what the Justice Department has done is provided a whole range of very specific examples. And what we ultimately need, I believe, is for Congress to set up a system that is efficient. That doesn't inconvenience the lawful gun seller or purchaser, but that makes sure that we're doing the best background check possible. And the fact, Anderson, that the system may not catch every single person. Or there may be a circumstance where somebody doesn't think that they have to register and do, and that may cause some red tape and bureaucracy for them. Which or inconvenience has to be weighed against the fact that we may be able to save. A whole bunch of families from the grief that some of the people in this audience have had to go through. And keep in mind, for the gun owners who are in attendance here, my suspicion is that you all had to go through a background check and it didn't prevent you from getting a weapon. And the notion that you should have to do that, but there are a whole bunch of folks who are less responsible than you who don't have to do it doesn't make much sense. So why we should resist this? Keep in mind that, historically, the NRA was in favor of background checks. Historically, many in the Republican Party were in favor of background checks. And what's changed is not that my proposals are particularly radical. What's changed is we've suddenly created an atmosphere in which I put out a proposal like background checks or after Sandy Hook, was calling on Congress, along with people like Gabby Giffords, who herself was a victim of gun violence. We put out a proposal that is common sense, modest, does not claim to solve every problem. Is respectful of the Second Amendment, and the way it is described is that we're trying to take away everybody's guns. And part of the reason I welcomed this opportunity by CNN to have a good discussion. And debate about it is because our position is consistently mischaracterized. And, by the way, there's a reason why the NRA is not here. They're just down the street, and since this is the main reason they exist. You'd think that they'd be prepared to have a debate with the president. Anderson Cooper. President Obama, we have invited them repeatedly. But if you listen to the rhetoric, it is so over the top and so overheated, and most importantly, is not acknowledging the fact that there's no other consumer item that we purchase. Question: so is that an open invitation that President Obama, hold on a second. Let me finish this point, Cooper. There's nothing else in our lives. That we purchase where we don't try to make it a little safer if we can. Traffic fatalities have gone down drastically during my lifetime. And part of it is technology, and part of it is the national highway safety. Administration does research and they figure out, you know what, seat belts really work. And then we passed some laws to make sure seat belts are fastened. Airbags make a lot of sense, let's try those out. Toys, we say, you know what, we find out that kids are swallowing toys all the time. Let's make sure that the toys aren't so small that they swallow them if they're for toddlers or infants. Medicine, kids can't open aspirin caps. Now, the notion that we would not apply the same basic principles to gun ownership as we do to everything else that we own just to try to make them safer. Or the notion that anything we do to try to make them safer is somehow a plot to take away guns. That contradicts what we do to try to create a better life for Americans in every other area of our lives. Anderson Cooper. President Obama, Anderson, I've said this repeatedly, I'm happy to meet with them. I'm happy to talk to them. But the conversation has to be based on facts and truth and what we're actually proposing. Not some imaginary fiction in which Obama is trying to take away your guns. The reason, by the way, that gun sales spike not just before I propose something. Every time there is a mass shooting, gun sales spike. And part of the reason is that the NRA has convinced many of its members that somebody is going come grab your guns, which is, by the way, really profitable for the gun manufacturers. It's a great advertising mechanism, but it's not necessary. There's enough of a market out there for people who want protection. Who are sportsmen, who wants to go hunting with their kids. And we can make it safer. Anderson Cooper. President Obama, absolutely. Anderson Cooper. Question: I appreciate you taking the time to come here. And I think that your message of hope is something I agree with, and I think it's great. And I think that by creating new laws you do give people hope. The thing is that the laws that we create don't stop these horrific things from happening, right? And that's a very tough pill to swallow. President Obama, right. Question: we want to think that we can make a law and people will follow it. But by the very nature of their crime, they're not following it. By the very nature of looking at the people who hurt our loved ones here. I don't know that any of them would have been stopped by the background check. And yet I crave that desire for hope, too. And so I think, part of it, we have to recognize that we cannot outlaw murder. Because the people who are murdering are. They're breaking the law, but they also don't have a moral code that. We have. And so they could do the same amount of damage with a pipe bomb. The problem is that they want to murder.